Every night, he'd quietly mop the halls and clock out without saying a word. But one evening, I decided to follow him, and what I discovered completely shattered everything I thought I knew about success, family, and sacrifice. You have to see this. It was the kind of building people bragged about working in. Marble floors so polished you could check your tie in the reflection, elevators that whispered instead of dinged, and glass walls that made every meeting look like it belonged in a stock photo. By 6:15 p.m., the place transformed. The high heels, expensive colognes, and fast-talking executives funneled toward the exits with the same urgency they brought into their morning meetings. That was usually when Miguel arrived. Most employees never bothered to look up when he walked in pushing his cleaning cart. The badge around his neck didn't open boardrooms or executive suites, so it didn't matter to them. His uniform, navy blue with his name stitched in white, blended with the after-hours quiet like he was part of the building itself. Some nodded politely. Most didn't look at all. The few who did glance his way only saw what they expected to see. A janitor, mid-50s, moving slowly but deliberately, his face as unreadable as the corporate art on the walls. He didn't interrupt, didn't hover, didn't small talk his way into anyone's awareness. He simply existed in the periphery, the way soft background music plays in hallways, noticed only when it stops. I'd seen him for years without ever really seeing him. My name is Alyssa. I'm what people call middle management. Not important enough for a private office, not replaceable enough to be ignored when promotions get tossed around. I worked late more often than I like to admit, mostly because my ambition and anxiety shared custody of my time. I used to assume Miguel didn't speak English well because he barely spoke at all. But every so often, I'd catch fragments of perfect sentences when he politely told someone, "Take your time," or "No rush, I'll come back later." The rare moments he did speak, his voice was low and gentle, like someone who had learned how to take up as little space as possible. Nobody ever asked where he came from. Nobody asked if he had kids, hobbies, or history. They knew the barista's dog's name, the CEO's golf scores, and the intern's podcast, but not the name of the man who emptied their bins and wiped fingerprints off their glass doors. If someone spilled coffee, they'd whisper, "Miguel will get it." If the trash overflowed, they'd leave a sticky note that just said "full." Some treated him like a tool, others like wallpaper. No one treated him like a person with a life outside the building. One night, as I packed up my laptop and slung my coat over my arm, I noticed him crouched by the window, wiping down the ledge with meticulous care. A small radio played from his cart, classical music, barely audible. For a split second, I wondered, who is he when he leaves this place? Then the thought passed, just like everyone else always let him pass. The night it happened, I hadn't planned on staying late. I'd promised myself I'd leave by 6, maybe get takeout and pretend I still had a personal life. But a client slid a last-minute revision into my inbox at 5:47 p.m., and by the time I finished rewriting half the proposal, the building was nearly empty. Most of the lights had shifted to energy-saving mode, casting long shadows across the hallways. The office printers down the corridor hummed like distant machinery in a quiet factory. I stretched, saved my work, and headed toward the copy room to print the final packet. That's when I heard the soft clack of plastic and the rustle of paper. Miguel stood with the back panel of the large industrial printer open, his sleeves slightly rolled up. A mangled sheet of paper sat crumpled in his hand. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't frustrated. He was working the way you'd defuse a bomb, calmly, patiently, like there was dignity even in untangling jammed cardstock. I froze in the doorway for half a second, unsure if I should interrupt. "Is it acting up again?" I asked lightly. He glanced at me, then back at the machine. "Just a paper jam," he said, his tone warm but quiet. "Someone loaded the tray too full." His English was clear, no accent thick enough to hide behind, no hesitation. I stepped in a little closer, feeling oddly like I was trespassing. "I can help if you want." Miguel smiled, small, genuine, almost apologetic. "Thank you, but it's okay. I've got it." There was no condescension in his voice, no defensiveness, just assurance. He tugged the final torn piece free and closed the latch with a soft click that sounded more like a practiced motion than guesswork. I waited for the usual transactional end to the conversation, the awkward nod, the exit. But he surprised me. "Are you printing something tonight?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, lifting the stack of papers in my hand. "Client presentation." He stepped aside, pressing the power button to reset the machine. It should work now. I loaded my pages, hit print, and watched the first sheet glide out perfectly aligned. He wiped down the side panel with a cloth, not because it was dirty, but because he always seemed to finish what he started completely. "Thanks," I said. He nodded once. "Have a good night." It was nothing, really. A 30-second interaction. But something about it, his composure, his certainty, the sense that he'd solved far bigger problems than office equipment, sat with me on the drive home. For the first time, the question didn't pass as quickly. Who was he when the uniform came off? The Monday after that late-night encounter, the office was its usual ecosystem of caffeine, deadlines, and overheard conversations. Most people didn't know Miguel's name, but they spoke about him the way some people talk about the weather, brief, passing, and without any real interest. I was in the break room, waiting for the microwave to finish when I first heard it. 2 analysts from marketing were standing by the counter, stirring creamer into their coffee. One of them, Tyler, said with a laugh, "Did you see the janitor trying to fix the copier the other day? They really should just call maintenance instead of letting random people mess with equipment." His coworker shrugged. "He's probably just trying to look useful. You know, some of these guys don't even have high school diplomas. They take whatever job they can get." Tyler snorted. "Yeah, well, I'd mop floors too if it meant not starving." They laughed, not maliciously, just carelessly. The kind of tone people use when they're confident no one will challenge them. I didn't say anything. I just waited for my lunch to finish heating and left without making eye contact. But something about their words clung to me like static. That evening, as I left my office to grab my bag, I passed the small supply alcove near the service elevator. Miguel was sitting on a step stool with a half-packed cart beside him. The lights were dim, and he had a notebook open in his lap, worn leather cover, pages thick with folded sheets and scribbled notes. He wasn't scrolling through a phone or staring blankly at the wall like most people on break. He was writing, pen moving steadily, his brow slightly creased in concentration. I couldn't see the words, but I recognized the focus. It was the way my colleagues looked when they were drafting contracts or solving financial projections. Before I could make sense of the sight, he closed the notebook gently, as though it held something fragile, and tucked it into his bag. He stood, nodded politely as he passed me, and continued down the hall without a sound. Curiosity shifted into something quieter, heavier, respect. Over the next few days, I became painfully aware of the way people spoke around him. He's probably working 3 jobs. Bet he sends money back home somewhere. Poor guy, imagine being that age and still cleaning offices. No one said these things to him. They said them near him, about him, with the confidence of people who believe their version of reality is the only one that exists. I started noticing how often he moved through the space unseen, how people would drop trash on tables 2 steps from a bin because someone will get it, how they spoke of ambition as if titles were proof of worth. And every time I remembered his steady hands at the printer, or the way he closed that notebook like it mattered, the questions grew louder. What if all our assumptions were wrong? What if the person we overlooked the most was carrying more responsibility, more history, more purpose than any of us knew? That was the first time I realized silence didn't mean emptiness. Sometimes it meant depth, just not the kind people bothered to look for. It happened on a Thursday, a day so long it felt like I'd worked 2 of them back to back. Most of the office had cleared out by 6, but I stayed behind to polish a presentation before Friday's pitch. By the time I shut down my computer, the building was nearly silent, that strange after-hours hush where every sound feels amplified. As I walked toward the elevator, I heard the familiar squeak of wheels and the soft thud of a mop bucket being set aside. Miguel was finishing his route, wiping down the glass entry doors with slow, deliberate strokes. The lobby lights cast a faint glow across the marble floor, and for once, there was no one rushing past him. I don't know why I paused by the stairwell railing to watch. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was the memory of those careless comments in the break room and my silence. He put away his supplies, locked the janitorial closet, and glanced around the lobby like someone making sure they left nothing behind. Then he headed toward the side exit, not the front where employees usually left, but the service door near the loading dock. Most of the staff parked in the garage. Others called rideshares or caught the metro 2 blocks away. But Miguel didn't turn toward the parking structure or the bus stop. He walked east, purposefully, not wandering, down a narrow street lined with older buildings and dim streetlights. I don't remember making the conscious decision to follow him. I just remember that my feet moved before my reasoning caught up. I kept a respectful distance, far enough not to intrude, close enough not to lose sight. Every few steps, I questioned myself. What am I doing? Why am I following this man, like some amateur investigator? What do I expect to find? And underneath those questions, one quieter, persistent truth. I'd spent years working in the same building as him, and still knew nothing beyond what he cleaned. Miguel walked with the kind of posture you don't expect from someone exhausted, a quiet determination in the way his shoulders squared, the steady rhythm of his steps. He didn't check his phone. He didn't slow down. He didn't look around nervously or distractedly the way most people did when walking alone at night. He crossed 2 intersections, passed a shuttered bakery, and turned into a street I'd never had reason to explore. A part of town that didn't have wine bars or yoga studios or condo developments with names like The Reserve. I hesitated at the corner, half convinced to stop and go home, but something in me resisted the retreat. This wasn't nosiness, not the shallow kind anyway. It was something else. Something like the uncomfortable realization that maybe I had been complicit, not in cruelty, but in ignorance. And once you notice someone you've overlooked, it's hard to go back to pretending they're invisible. So I kept walking, not because I had the right to know, but because, for once, I finally wanted to understand. Miguel didn't slow down until he reached a squat brick building tucked between a closed laundromat and a thrift store with a flickering sign. The paint on the walls was peeling. The windows were barred but clean. A faded banner above the door read, Willow Street Community Center. I stopped at the corner, unsure if I should keep going. This felt beyond curiosity now, like crossing into someone's private world. But before I could turn back, the front door opened. A boy, maybe 11 or 12, dashed outside with a backpack bouncing against his shoulders. The moment he saw Miguel, his face lit up. "Señor M, you made it." Miguel smiled, really smiled, and ruffled the kid's hair. "Of course I did. Are you ready for your spelling test tomorrow?" The boy groaned theatrically. "Only if you quiz me again." Miguel nodding was all the boy needed before he darted back inside. I inched closer, careful to stay out of sight but unable to walk away. Through the open door, I could hear voices, layers of conversation in English and Spanish, laughter, the clatter of folding chairs. Miguel stepped inside, and I risked peeking through the entrance. What I saw didn't match anything I knew about him. The dim lobby gave way to a wide, multi-purpose room with mismatched tables and a bulletin board overflowing with flyers. A group of women sat in a semicircle, practicing simple English phrases from laminated sheets. Miguel pulled another stack of papers from his bag and handed them to a volunteer in her 20s. Down the hall, a classroom had been set up with donated textbooks and crayons. 3 kids were hunched over worksheets, and an older teen gently walked them through word problems. A crock pot and trays of food sat on a folding table near the back, rice, beans, soup in paper cups. People didn't just acknowledge Miguel, they knew him. A woman with tired eyes and a baby on her hip hugged him like greeting a brother. 2 teenagers waved excitedly from across the room. A man stacking canned goods spoke to him in Spanish with the kind of familiarity you don't fake. They called him Miguel, teacher, mentor, Señor M. And he moved through it, all with an ease and authority I'd never seen in the polished corridors of our building. It hit me slowly at first, then all at once. He didn't just clean offices. He built something here, he led. He taught English to parents who wanted a better chance at jobs. He helped kids with homework their parents couldn't read. He organized meals, distributed jackets from a donation closet, translated letters, scheduled doctor visits, filled out forms. At my company, people barely made eye contact with him. Here, people waited for him, trusted him, thanked him. I stood just outside the doorway, my hand hovering over the knob, the cold evening air behind me and a flood of truth in front of me. Everything I thought I knew about work, value, and status felt embarrassingly small compared to what I was witnessing. This wasn't a side hobby. It was a second job, no, a calling. One that required more heart, more energy, and more devotion than most people gave in their full-time careers. I followed him expecting mystery. What I found instead was purpose. And it was bigger than anything that fit inside a janitor's cart. I didn't go inside that first night. I stood there until the lights dimmed and families trickled out in groups, children wrapped in jackets too big or too thin. Miguel stayed behind, gathering papers, wiping tables, locking storage bins. He moved with the same quiet focus he had at the office, only here, no one ignored him. I almost left. I almost walked back to my car and pretended I hadn't followed him across half the neighborhood like a shadow with questions. But the weight of what I'd seen wouldn't let me go. When he finally stepped outside, the street was almost empty. He locked the door behind him and turned with a small exhale, not surprised, not startled, just aware. I stepped out from the corner of the building. "Miguel, I'm sorry." He looked at me, not confused, not suspicious, just waiting. "I shouldn't have followed you," I said. "It wasn't my place." A long silence stretched between us, the kind that might have felt cold with anyone else. But he wasn't defensive. He wasn't angry. "You were curious," he said quietly. I nodded, embarrassed. I didn't know, I had no idea you. He raised a hand gently, not to silence me, but to spare me the fumbling. "That's because you weren't meant to know," he said. "This isn't about being seen." I stood there on the cracked sidewalk, fumbling for something honest to hold on to. "Can I ask, why?" For the first time, I saw something shift in his expression. Not pride, not pain exactly, but memory. "I used to be a teacher," he said. "Back home, literature, and history. My wife worked with children too. We dreamed of coming here so our children could have more. His eyes flicked toward the center behind him, then back to the street. When we immigrated, my credentials didn't transfer. The paperwork was impossible, the process too long. We spent what we had trying. What about teaching here? I asked gently. He gave a slight shake of his head. You need licenses, exams, money, time. We had none of those. My wife got sick. I took jobs I could find, kitchens, warehouses, night shifts. We lost most of our savings paying for medicine. Your wife, I hesitated. She passed, he finished softly, 10 years ago. I swallowed the ache in my throat, unsure if it was sorrow or shame. What about your children? I asked. They're grown now. One of them did not do well for some time. I help with the grandchildren when I can. And the community center. A faint smile touched his face. It started with 2 families in an apartment complex. People needed someone to translate letters, fill out forms, help with homework. Then more came. Now we rent this place month to month. I glanced at his worn shoes, his tired posture, the lines around his eyes. You pay for it? I asked quietly. Some, he said. Donations come and go, but people always need help. That doesn't wait for money. He didn't tell the story like a confession. He didn't apologize for any part of it. He didn't wear it like a tragedy either. He spoke the way some people breathe, simply because it was the only way forward. I don't want pity, he said finally. Only respect for them, not for me. I nodded, humbled in a way I hadn't expected. For the first time, I realized he hadn't been invisible all these years. We had just never learned to look in his direction. I didn't tell anyone what I'd seen. Not at first. It felt too private, too sacred, like speaking it out loud would cheapen it, or worse, turn it into gossip fodder for people who measured worth in salaries and job titles. But something shifted in me after that night. The following week, I stopped at a bookstore on my way home and picked up children's workbooks, math, reading, English as a second language. I told the cashier they were for my niece, even though I didn't have one. Somehow, telling the truth felt too revealing. I waited until after dark and drove to the community center. I didn't go inside. I just left a bag of supplies by the door and walked away before anyone could see me. The next time, I stayed a few minutes longer. A volunteer stacking canned goods thanked me and asked my name. When I said, Alyssa, she smiled like she was saving it for later. Little by little, helping stopped feeling like interference and started feeling like responsibility. I began tutoring on Tuesday nights, just an hour at first. Kids with big eyes and bigger backpacks sat across from me, sounding out words with the kind of effort adults rarely notice. Some of their parents waited quietly in folding chairs, practicing English phrases under their breath. I watched Miguel move from room to room, exhausted but alert, always present. He wasn't the man who pushed a mop down sterile hallways at night, not here. Here, he was anchor, translator, teacher, protector. One evening, after the families had gone, I lingered to help stack chairs. I saw him counting a thin envelope of cash, setting aside bills with quiet precision. Is that rent for the center? I asked. He nodded, not looking up. And you pay it from your salary. He paused. I use what I can. Others help when they are able. I didn't ask how much, what I can meant. I already knew the answer in the slump of his shoulders. At work, the world remained unchanged, but I didn't. One afternoon, a group near the elevators was joking about how the janitor must make bank with all the overtime, laughing like the idea was absurd and safe. I didn't walk past this time. His name is Miguel, I said evenly. They looked at me, surprised. And unless you know his paycheck, I continued, maybe don't assume you understand anything about his life." The silence after that was awkward, uncomfortable in a way that made them clear their throats and look elsewhere. But none of them laughed. I didn't feel heroic, just awake. I started noticing more. How he greeted security guards by name, how he fixed things no one asked him to, how he stayed late to mop up spills others pretended not to see. It wasn't the work that defined him. It was the integrity behind it. And somewhere between those nights at the center and those moments of quiet defiance in the office, my definition of success began to pull at the seams. Maybe worth wasn't in titles or LinkedIn updates or the square footage of your home. Maybe it was in who waited for you when you arrived and who you showed up for when no one was watching. Winter crept in quietly, not with snow, but with notices. It started when I walked into the community center one evening and found a folded letter sitting on the front table, held down by a chipped mug. A few of the volunteers were whispering near the hallway. Their voices were low, but their eyes said everything. I didn't pick up the letter right away. I waited until the tutoring session ended, until the last child snapped their backpack shut and the hallways emptied. Miguel was in the supply room, sorting canned goods that had been donated that week. I found him alone, sealing a box with worn tape. "Is it true?" I asked softly. He didn't look up. About what? I unfolded the notice I'd finally taken from the table. The words were painfully clear. Rent increase effective immediately. Failure to comply within 30 days will result in termination of lease. The number at the bottom, triple what they currently paid, landed in my chest like a stone. "They can't do this," I whispered. "They can," he said quietly, and they did. I expected emotion, a flash of anger, fear, frustration. But he just kept placing things in order, like tidiness could slow time. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" I asked. He hesitated. "People here already carry more than they should. Worry is a weight I don't want to add." Over the next week, his exhaustion became visible in ways it hadn't before. He started picking up extra shifts, weekends, overnights, anything the company offered. I saw him polishing floors past midnight and then teaching children less than 12 hours later. One night, I walked into the hall and saw him staring at a flyer for low-income housing, folded in his hand. He tucked it away before anyone could ask. I pulled one of the older volunteers aside, a woman named Maribel who had been there since the center first opened. "Has he asked for help with the rent?" I asked. She shook her head. He would rather bleed quietly than let us panic. Later that week, I found out something that made my stomach twist. Miguel had met with a man about selling his car, the old silver sedan I'd occasionally seen parked a block away. It was the only vehicle he owned, and the only way he took his grandchildren to appointments or picked up food donations. He planned to use the money to cover at least 2 months of rent while he figured out the rest. I heard the rest of the plan through Maribel, who had accidentally overheard him on the phone. He intended to stay at the center overnight, just until it stabilized again. No bed, no privacy, no home of his own, just quiet sacrifice disguised as strategy. That night, I sat in my car outside the center long after everyone had left, my hands gripping the steering wheel like it could anchor me to something solid. There's a moment when admiration turns into responsibility, when watching someone carry the world stops feeling noble and starts feeling complicit. Miguel thought silence protected people. But sometimes silence is just another kind of wound. And I couldn't watch him tear himself apart to keep others whole, not this time. The plan didn't come to me all at once. It formed slowly, out of panic, respect, and the quiet conviction that if Miguel wouldn't save himself, someone else had to step in. I started with the people, who already owed him more than they could say. Maribel was the first person I spoke to. Then, the high school volunteer who translated during tutoring sessions. Then the single mother whose son Miguel helped enroll in speech therapy. Word spread the way good whispers do, with urgency and care. But I knew it wouldn't be enough. So I did something I never imagined I would. I brought it to work. It started in the break room, then in the hallway, then over email. I didn't share every detail of his life, not the grief, not the immigration battles, not the nights he went without sleep. I shared what the center did. I shared what was at risk. I shared what he gave, night after night, without expecting anyone to notice. Some people were stunned, some were ashamed. A few were skeptical, but curiosity softened even them. Then something unexpected happened. One of the HR managers, a woman named Denise, asked if she could speak to the executive team about it. She said quietly, "You're not the only person who's seen him treat this place with more respect than the people who own it." Within a week, I had permission to use one of the conference rooms on the 3rd floor after hours. I didn't tell Miguel. No one did. The night of the intervention, about 30 people showed up, more than I expected, less than he deserved. Parents from the center brought homemade food. Volunteers brought photos of classes and events. Co-workers, people who had once stepped around him without a word, showed up still in their suits. Even the CEO came. I'll never forget the look on Miguel's face when he walked in, thinking he'd been asked to help fix a spill before heading home. He froze in the doorway. The room fell quiet, not out of ceremony, but reverence. Maribel approached first. She took his hands and said simply, "You cannot carry us alone anymore." One by one, people stepped forward, not to flatter him, but to thank him. A father described how Miguel helped him study for his citizenship test. A teenage girl said she passed English because he stayed up translating her lessons. A coworker admitted she'd never said hello in 5 years and was ashamed of it. I watched the CEO, a man who rarely noticed anything outside revenue reports, stand stiffly at the back of the room, listening like someone hearing a language for the first time. When it was his turn to speak, he cleared his throat and said, "If what I'm hearing is true, then this company should be supporting the people who make us better, even when we don't see them." He offered sponsorship on the spot, pledging funds to cover the increased rent, supplies, and staffing. He proposed a formal partnership between the company and the center. He even said Miguel's work would be featured in the company's community outreach initiatives. Miguel tried to refuse. He said others needed help more than he needed recognition. He said he didn't do any of it for applause. And we believed him. But this wasn't about applause. This was about making sure he never had to choose between survival and service again. For the first time, the man who worked unseen was surrounded by people who refused to let him disappear into the background again. The center would not close. And neither would the chapter of his life he'd tried so hard to keep hidden from the world. 6 months later, the building doesn't look the same, and neither does Miguel's life. The community center is no longer fighting to survive. The rent is secured for years. Volunteers rotate daily. Local teachers, college students, and even a few of our coworkers now help tutor, cook, and translate. There are new tables, fresh paint, working computers, and shelves full of donated books. Above the entrance, a new sign hangs quietly in deep bronze letters. The Alina Reyes Learning Center. Miguel didn't want his own name on it. Instead, he chose to honor his late wife, the woman he once taught beside, the woman he swore to keep helping others in memory of. The board agreed unanimously. He still cleans the halls at the company some nights, not because he has to, but because he says it keeps him grounded. "Work is work," he told me once. What matters is what you build around it. But now he's not alone. When his shift ends, he doesn't walk to the center in the dark by himself. Someone is always there, waiting to drive him, walk with him, or lock up after he finally lets himself go home before midnight. He no longer pays the bills in secret. He no longer carries the weight of 3 jobs on one pair of shoulders. The children there don't just see him as a teacher anymore. They call him Abuelo Miguel. And the parents who once relied on his quiet strength now refuse to let him bear the load without support. As for the company, no one passes him in the hallway without a greeting now. Some still don't know the full story, but their eyes meet his differently. They see a man, not a uniform, a leader, not a laborer. I think about the night I followed him more than I admit. Not because I'm proud of what I did, but because of what it revealed about me. I thought I was curious. I was actually blind. I thought I was observant. I was only comfortable. I thought I understood success. I was measuring it with the wrong scale. Miguel never asked to be seen. But once the world caught a glimpse of the truth, the real transformation wasn't his, it was ours. Here's what I learned. Worth isn't announced. It isn't worn. It isn't titled or salaried or praised. It lives in the quiet sacrifices most people never bother to look for. It shows up when no one is keeping score. And sometimes, the most extraordinary people are the ones sweeping the floor while everyone else walks past, never realizing they're stepping over a story that could change everything. Some people clean floors by day and build futures by night, not for applause, but because love doesn't need recognition to be powerful.